conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Evening all, and welcome to the Neil Oliver Show on GB News TV, radio and online. Coming up on the show tonight, we'll discuss a landmark ruling after the Court of Appeal overturned a judgment which declared a 19-year-old was mentally incompetent purely because she disagreed with her doctor's advice to stop life-saving treatment. Educator and author Mike Fairclough will be here to talk about how a return to traditional teaching might help better educate young men. And in similar vein, I'll also be joined by successful YouTuber and author Cameron McGregor. His channel, Men and the City, is about embracing a changed world for modern men. All of that and plenty of discussion with my brilliant panellist, the journalist and financial expert Jasmine Birtles. But first, an update on the latest news headlines.
Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister vowed rioters would regret taking part in what he called far-right thuggery after a fifth day of violence in England, as the government announced emergency security for mosques amid the threat of further disorder. The Home Office announced mosques would be offered greater protection under a new rapid response process designed to quickly tackle the threat of further attacks on places of worship. It comes as anti-immigration demonstrators attacked police and smashed the windows of a hotel in Rotherham. Masked rioters threw lengths of wood and sprayed fire extinguishers at officers. It comes after police warned further violence was likely following protests in England and in Northern Ireland. At least 90 people were arrested yesterday amid clashes between demonstrators and counter-protesters, with police officers attacked and injured. It comes after 3 little girls were killed in a knife attack at a dance club in Southport almost a week ago. Sir Keir Starmer says those causing violent trouble will face convictions.
I won't shy away from calling it what it is: far-right thuggery. To those who feel targeted because of the colour of your skin or your faith, I know how frightening this must be. I want you to know that this violent mob do not represent our country, and we will bring them to justice.
The police service in Northern Ireland says those involved in violence which erupted following anti-immigration protests in Belfast will be dealt with using the full force of the law. It's after a supermarket owner in Belfast says his business has been reduced to ashes after it was targeted during the disorder. Northern Ireland's First Minister Michelle O'Neill says those involved in violence on the streets of Belfast should be quickly brought to the courts. This morning, a clean-up operation was underway in the Donegal Road area following last night's unrest. Number 10 sources are disputing claims that Sir Keir Starmer is planning a summer getaway tomorrow despite the risk of further unrest. It comes after Tory leadership candidate, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, urged the Prime Minister to cancel his trip and get a grip on the situation. Many more arrests have been promised in the coming days as the Prime Minister said the police have his full support to take action against extremists. Prince Harry and his wife Meghan have been discussing online safety with broadcasters in the United States.
I think one of the scariest things that we've learned over the course of the last 15, 17 years that social media's been around, and more so recently, is the fact that it could happen to absolutely anybody. I mean, we always talk about, in the olden days, if your kids were under your roof, you knew what they were up to. At least they were safe, right? And now they can be in the next door room on a tablet or on a phone and can be going down these rabbit holes. And before you know it, within 24 hours, they could be taking their life.
And the BBC is paying for the therapy of a woman who made complaints about disgraced newsreader Hugh Edwards. According to the Sunday Times, Rachel became friends with him on Instagram in 2018, but made complaints in 2021 and 2022 after their relationship became toxic. It comes days after Edwards pleaded guilty to making indecent images of children. The BBC has declined to comment. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Something is rotten in the state. I could say something is rotten in the state of Britain, but it applies all over. Metastasised rot. People everywhere are daily made angrier, more scared of each other, when they would do better to be angry with the rotten state and the rotten state we're in on account of it. Build back better. Remember that codswallop. Nothing gets better. Instead, crisis follows crisis, war follows war, erosion of freedom follows erosion of freedom. It's plain to anyone who's looking that the pitiful leaders, puppeticians, cause the problems and then offer pre-prepared solutions that benefit only them and those pulling their strings. Are you as free as before? As free as you want to be? Are you happy? Are you well? Are you confident about your children's future? And if not, why not? Why would you put up with this rotten state? We're told we live in a world of technological and pharmaceutical solutions to all ills. We're also told war is peace. It's all lies and doublespeak. I say it's unmistakable and undeniable that something somewhere has gone badly wrong, probably long ago, and that a succession of unwanted leaders only make matters worse. We're offered and then made to endure the worst possible leaders at the worst of times. For years now, the craven mouthpieces of the state have pushed a relentlessly anti-human agenda. American author Eric Hoffer said in The True Believer that no one can be honourable unless he honours mankind. People, we are told, fellow human beings, are the ultimate problem, requiring the ultimate solution, which is to say fewer of us. Save the planet, and to hell with the people alive on it here and now. Some of the richest and therefore most influential people talk casually about there being too many of us alive in the world at one time. How dare they? Who are these people who stand in judgment, presuming to make decisions about who has a right to be here? They preach the need for smaller, colder, hungrier lives for all of us from the decks of super yachts and the steps of private jets. Global population reduction has been an objective of the West since at least the 1970s. And I do mean at least. Henry Kissinger drove such an agenda while advising US President Gerald Ford. He said that population control policy requires both high-level attention and continuing review and updating. It observes that US efforts must be undertaken in such a way as to minimise criticism. It's been there in the background or even in the foreground ever since. Population reduction equals anti-human. Anyone who says that fewer people are the solution to the problem is a psychopath. We've somehow enabled an environment, an ecosystem in which psychopaths thrive and prosper. Agenda 2030 is in part the continuation of the same Malthusian eugenicist attitudes that are never far away, final solutions. It's an agenda that is anti-human almost by definition, given that achievement of the global goals of Agenda 2030 will likely lead to billions of deaths by starvation and by the pestilence and chaos that travel alongside man-made hunger. Birth rates are falling all over the world already and have been for generations. Too few babies are born, and so indigenous populations are disappearing. In the 1960s, Americans were having, on average, 3.65 children. By now it's 1.66. And still, the powers that be insist there are too many of us. People are the problem, we're told. People are the problem right enough, but not the billions at the bottom of the pyramid, rather the few thousands at the top. Since 2020, we've been made to listen to talk of a great reset, a new world order led by Davos man and his pampered ilk. There's something horribly casual about all of this, a casual disregard for human life, a casual disregard for humanity itself. The implicit message we're fed is that since there are too many people, too many of the wrong sort of people at least, that many of those people are therefore expendable. As a consequence, life has got cheap, or even cheaper than before. What's a few 100,000 men and boys cold in the clay of Ukraine? What's a few tens of thousands of women and children in Gaza? Our leaders like war. We can tell this because they keep pouring the fuel of money onto the fires of wars burning now in Ukraine, in the Middle East and elsewhere. Our economies literally thrive on death and destruction, courtesy of the military-industrial complex. They talk blithely about more war with Russia, with China, with Iran, with North Korea. Peace has been made a dirty word. And so there's talk too of fresh armies, bigger armies, more bodies. There's talk too of civil war all over the West, internecine strife, civil unrest, stoked by those that thrive and seek to gain from chaos. Mass migration around the world is a symptom of the metastasising cancer of chaos. People have been on the move from countries ruined by Western interference, ruined by invasion, by bombing, by engineered regime change. As the people up and move, our rotten leaders respond to the upheaval by throwing open the doors, dissolving borders, defaming indigenous populations as intolerant in the face of the arrival of strangers, their arrival by the millions, sowing more chaos. For years now, decades, we the people all over the world have been put on edge, set at each other's throats. Black against white against brown, Christian against Muslim against Jew. People bleed and die, homes and businesses burn. The rich just get richer and the powerful just gain more power. On the eve of Britain's entry into the First World War, Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey uttered his famous line, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." Grey was going blind then, so that it's not clear which descending darkness he was referring to, but he saw darkness coming just the same. As a consequence of disregard for the sanctity of every human life, we're surrounded by a gathering darkness. The casual, anti-human nature of our leaders and of the states they profess to lead, states made rotten by our leaders' corruption, is undeniable and unavoidable. Something is rotten in the state, and the stink of it comes from our leaders. A fish rots from the head, as they say. In search of the source of the stink, we shouldn't look from side to side at each other, but up above, among the so-called elite. They would have us lose sight of what it really means to be human and alive. Instead of valuing one another, the possibilities therein, they would prefer that we fear one another and so make that happen. Canadian anthropologist Wade Davis said, "The myriad cultures of the world make up a web of spiritual life and cultural life that envelops the planet and is as important to the well-being of the planet as indeed is the biological web of life." In a talk he gave in 2010, he told his audience that at the time they were born, there were 6,000 languages spoken on the planet, but that by then, by 2010, only half of those survived. Every 2 weeks or so, a language dies, apparently. An elder dies, and with him or her is lost forever a whole way of comprehending reality. Davis said every language is not just a vocabulary and a grammar, but rather a flash of the human spirit. He said every language is an old-growth forest of the mind, a watershed, a thought, an ecosystem of spiritual possibilities. We should be better than we're being made now. Davis speaks about the Kogi people of Colombia who regard themselves as the elder brothers of the world and see us, the younger, unwise brothers, responsible for destroying the world. The so-called green agenda is the industrialised destruction of the world, right enough. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, records the stuff of intangible cultural heritage around the world, rather than things that can be touched, architecture, artefacts, art. The intangibles are what people know and only carry in their heads and hearts. So, folklore, cuisine, customs, beliefs, traditions, knowledge, language. With every single human being lost or left unborn, we lose something else intangible, which is their contribution, great or small. Any man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Instead of the poet's kindly thoughts, inclusive in the true and uncorrupted sense of the word, we are given to believe that fewer people is better, that less of us is more. This is a sinister and insidious philosophy, a bitter seed sown, and we're already reaping the harvest. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. I fail to see how anyone could look at our world now and say it's on the path to a good place. I fail to see how anyone could look at our leaders and say they are the ones to follow to that good place. Corrupt trees and evil fruit, that's what they are, and that's what we get. In this 21st century world of Agenda 2030 and the rest of the anti-human agenda, we're growing more and more casual about the prospect. In fact, what our leaders evidently regard as the necessity that the planet be rid of billions of us once and for all. I'm sickened by constantly hearing about the deaths of children, whether it be in ones and twos and threes or by the tens of thousands. Children dying is what happens when society is rendered anti-human at every level. Here's the thing. If the anti-humanists get their way, if they inflict upon us their one-size-fits-all, top-down, all-powerful, all-controlling, one-world government, we will have been rendered into a homogenous monoculture, denied our individuality and our humanity. If they meet their objectives, we will be fewer, we will be poorer, and we will have been remade in their empty image, the image of those who see themselves as nothing less than gods, and we as nothing more than dots on a spreadsheet of profit. Wade Davis said something else about how the other people of the world are not failed attempts at being us, that on the contrary, every culture is a unique set of answers to the question of what it means to be human and alive. If we would save the world, it will entail endeavouring to see each other as parts of the solution. If we would save the world, we will have to save every last one of us. Joining me this week for the duration of the show, friend and journalist Jasmine Birtles. Lovely to see you as always, Jasmine.
Thank you.
Do you feel that there's something rotten somewhere, that we've lost the love of life?
Yes, I agree so much. And you know, I was picking up some of the biblical references there because I do feel that we are in a time of revelation. And as I listen to you talking about the human and saving the human, my sense of saving the human is getting it back into the divine. I think when we separated ourselves and our sense of life, our sense of humanity from divinity, then we set ourselves on a path of destruction and darkness. I'm thinking, you know, Václav Havel said once that when a nation loses God, it finds itself under this mega machinery. Of course, he was in a communist regime, so he knew about mega machinery. But he was saying that at that time and now, man is trying to make himself like God, but actually he is then subjected to this mega machinery, which is kind of where we are at now. As you say, it's inhuman. It sees us as dots on a screen, nothing more. It sees us very much as expendable. We're a nuisance, and it's cruel. Whereas if we go back to as more of the sense of the divine, I'm thinking, you know, the Sermon on the Mount, for example, which says all sorts of things. Blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. It talks about turning the other cheek, loving your neighbour and loving your enemies as well as your neighbour. You know, if we could all each do just a little tiny bit of that, each of us doing a tiny bit of that would make a massive difference. And I do think that and our own desire for good, for light, if each individual person can do whatever we can, however hopeless we feel that it might be, but to do whatever we can to get more of that light, more of that humanity embraced in divinity, then each one of us will together make a big difference. We really will. I don't think that it's hopeless at all.
I think that's lovely what you said, and I agree completely. I wonder, why didn't we see it coming? You know, I mean, we've had centuries, really, of replacing meaning and humanity with technology and machinery.
Yes.
It's not as though we couldn't have seen that when you eventually nudge machines into the predominant place, that there will be a disregard for us messy biological human beings.
Yes, I agree. I think much of it has been a gradual hypnosis. We haven't realised. We've had entertainment, we've had an increase of convenience. The road to hell is paved with convenience, as we know. You've got convenience, you've got entertainment, music. I mean, I remember the Ayatollah Khomeini back in the day saying that pop music was the opiate of the people or something along those lines, and I thought, actually, yeah, he's got a point. I mean, I was, I was pretty young at the time, but I thought, it's a good point. We've got that. We had sexualisation of society, adults and now children. We've had all kinds of distractions, sort of going, look, shiny, shiny, don't forget about, what's the reality of what's really happening. Shiny, shiny. So I think it's been one big mass hypnosis. And I have to say, I am so grateful for what I call the blessed COVID for opening my eyes to a whole load of stuff, not just, the lies. Yes, isn't it? The irony, absolutely. And I keep calling it the blessed COVID because it's like, everything is sort of falling apart, all these layers upon layers of gunk. You go, well, that's lies, and I've believed all of this all of my life, and now I can see, obviously it's lies. Duh, what was I doing?
The final big push to pull the wool over everyone's eyes, and ironically,
yes,
it turned a bright light.
Yes, it did.
What? You're doing what? What?
Yes.
OK, we're on the break already, after which I'll be discussing the landmark ruling in the Court of Appeal in the sad case of Sika Thirumalesh with a member of her legal counsel, the lawyer Roger Kushka. You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Did you ever flirt with the idea of going to America?
Yeah, I've twice happened to be. Once I was offered in Canada the job of a weatherman.
Oh.
Yeah, I was offered that. And I just sort of thought of it, what is the point where your mother, your father would never see you on TV? What's the point of doing it if nobody knows you on it, So I thought...
Big money, though, even for a weatherman.
I did, yeah, it was more than a weather job, but I said no, basically. And then I went and I did this quiz show for Fox TV.
Oh.
Yeah, and they said, we want the Irish guy that does the lottery. I think they meant Dermot O'Leary or something. They ended up, they got me, and I couldn't believe it. And I went over to do a daytime version of this. And then 3 days into it, they changed everything, and they said, this is so good, we're putting this out in the evening. And I remember phoning my wife and saying, we're going to have to move out to California.
Oh, wow.
They really want me here, and I'm going down. You know that street with all the palm trees and whatever? That's the way I was going to work, in this limo and whatever. And I had a bungalow there and a golf cart. It was absolutely incredible. Anyway, I'll cut this very long story short. So I'm working really, really bad. A lot of very ignorant people, it has to be said. And really have one regret in my life that I didn't punch a guy when I was out there. I really would have, if I had my life to live again, I would have really satisfiedly been sacked for punching this git. But basically, anyway, they put the show out. One episode of the show went out and it came fourth in its rating. So it was behind Lost, it was behind The Biggest Loser, there was something else there.
Fair enough.
Fair enough, and it came fourth, and that was it. It disappeared. 36 shows or so disappeared. Disappeared, never to be shown again.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. Last year, a 19-year-old girl known to the world only as ST was told that she was delusional for wanting to fight for her life rather than have her life-sustaining treatment withdrawn. Only after her death was ST named as Sika Thirumalesh and her story properly told. Sika had been struggling with a degenerative mitochondrial disorder and was hoping experimental treatment in Canada could save her life. But doctors from the University Hospital's Birmingham NHS Foundation Trust said that it was in her best interests that life-sustaining treatment be withdrawn. This week, though, in a landmark ruling, the Court of Appeal overturned the decision of the Court of Protection, which declared that Sika lacked mental capacity to make decisions about her medical treatment. I'm joined now by human rights lawyer and legal counsel to the Christian Legal Centre, Roger Kishka. Thank you, Roger, for making time for us.
Thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Roger, when this story it was brought to my attention last year, I thought it couldn't be true. I thought that can't be right. That can't be happening to a person who is of age, has been declared medically sound by independent psychiatrists. She wants to keep on fighting, and she's been told that's no longer her decision to make. And yet that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, it blows the mind, really. This was a young lady who was successfully completing her A-levels. She had the strength and the will to live. She had said all along that she wants to die trying to live. She was well aware of the pain, the suffering, because she was going through it, yet she still wanted to live and get that treatment in Canada. She had 2 consultant psychiatrists vouch for her competency. There was no psychiatrist on the other side saying she wasn't competent, yet the Court of Protection took the side of the clinicians and not the psychiatrists, merely because she wouldn't accept their diagnosis. And that alone, they suggested, was a sign of mental incompetence.
Exactly. I mean, it beggars belief that all this time later, a subsequent decision has been made that, well, no, that was a mistake and she was right all along. That decision of the Court of Protection at the time, did that set a kind of precedent? Or was that already a precedent that was there based on, previous decisions?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, because the Court of Appeal kind of gives a mixed message on that, saying that the Court of Protection was following precedent, but it was doing so in a sense incorrectly. And so they reset what the precedent should be, and that is that the Mental Capacity Act provides a presumption of mental capacity that has to be overturned. And in this case, it wasn't. I mean, the issue is the Court of Protection is so secretive. And Sika was one person who was willing to raise her voice and make some noise. We don't know how many other families have gone through exactly the same. So what this judgment does, what this new precedent does, is she will help all the people in the future who disagree with their doctor's choice to remove their care, and they'll have their own choice and the presumption of mental capacity.
Bear with me, Roger, while I turn to my guest in the studio as well. Jasmine, it begs the question, have we really reached a point where others in positions of authority are more empowered to make decisions about our lives and deaths than we are?
Yes.
Even when we have been declared of sound mind.
Yeah, and I think it is, and it's a very worrying trend. And it does feel to me part of another worrying trend, which is towards euthanasia rather than life. And we're seeing this across the West, particularly in places like Canada. But on Friday, the Lords were discussing the potential to bring in a law where if you've been given 6 months to live, you can automatically have state-assisted suicide. Now, that, if that's allowed, and I totally understand people wanting to have that, but if that is put in law, that opens the doors to all sorts. I mean, you can have doctors having a little bit of pressure put on them going, we need some more beds, and then they can sort of make a pronouncement that it's going to be 6 months. And it may be true, it may not be. Doctors are regularly wrong and regularly do things that they shouldn't do. So all of this, I think it's like being presumed guilty before being found innocent. We should be promoting life before promoting death.
I think the question that really troubles me most of all is who benefited from making a decision that a 19-year-old woman who had been declared of sound mind by 2 independent psychiatrists, who benefited from that determined, secretive decision that she would be better off dead, and that decision was made for her by others? Who, cui bono?
It's a tragic question, and I just, it makes me think, how dated do the people involved in that case have to be that they can't even understand that someone would want to live, that their presumption is that it's better to die? Why didn't they take hope away from that young lady who was so courageous in wanting to live? And I agree with you. In all of these cases that I mentioned, it's just tragic. It leaves you jaded and wondering, what is up with the world we live in today?
I dread to think how her family must have reacted to this. In some ways, hearing that the mistake was made that led against her wishes to the death of your daughter or your sister or whoever, hearing that was a mistake is almost worse. I can imagine you'd almost want to be reassured that the right decision was taken. But after the death, to be told, oh, we shouldn't have done that, that's the worst outcome. How on earth do they internalise that and find a way ahead?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do it right here, right now. I'm calling on the government to open an inquiry into her death, into the Court of Protection, how these procedures are used to. We don't have de facto euthanasia in this country, but this is de jure euthanasia. Let's make no qualms about that, and there should be an inquiry open as to why that's possible in this country.
Roger Kitchka, I will only and always have questions about what happened to that young woman. But thank you very much indeed for making the time and making plain some of what happened in the last year or so. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, educator, teacher, head teacher, author Mike Fairclough will be here to talk about how a return to traditional teaching might help better educate young men as they look for somewhere to turn in always troubled times.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have saved Storm. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere. Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. I'm a dad. I've got 3 kids, a daughter and 2 sons. I want to talk about what is plainly a crisis that's, I don't know, been manufactured for masculinity. Everywhere you look in the news at the moment, from Southport to Southend, we see images of men, some of them older, some of them younger, but all of them apparently lost in the maelstrom of it all. Whether you look at education, employment, or addiction rates, or suicide attempts, it's not a pretty picture. Certainly not for men, especially, also undeniable, white working class young men. So what can be done about turning boys into traditional men of old? I'm joined now by author and educator Mike Fairclough. Mike resigned from his head teaching post in East Sussex last year, saying he'd been discriminated against, harassed and bullied for his unorthodox approach to education. It's great to see you, Mike.
Good to see you too, Neil.
This is a challenge for all of us, I think. Parents, teachers, society at large. Now, I think you've got a thesis about there being a deliberate, controlled demolition of society that's been going on account of wider behaviour and the curriculums in our schools. I wonder if you could develop that thesis for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been an educator in primary schools for 30 years. And over the 3 decades, I've seen a kind of steady decline in several things. One, in the sort of quality of teachers coming into the profession. So the intellectual bar has been lowered considerably. And there's also been the introduction of ideologies such as the gender ideology and a real massive kind of emphasis as well on mental health, but in a way which exaggerates and emphasises people's weaknesses. So, for example, there seems to be this huge fear and demonisation of anxiety. Now, anxiety is something that children and adults feel every single day about something. It's just a natural way that we live. But the idea is that if you kind of, within the education sector, the more that it's looked at, there's this idea that it's somehow going to go away, and it simply doesn't. So my educational philosophy, and I was a head teacher for 20 years, and throughout that time, it was on a state-funded school in Eastbourne called West Rise Junior School, and I ran a farm, 120-acre farm as well, alongside the usual curriculum. Taught the children to shoot 410 shotguns, air rifles. Some of them would skin rabbits, pluck pigeons. Every single child would learn to light a fire and cook over an open fire.
It sounded brilliant, Mike. It sounded brilliant. Yep. Every time I read about your school, it sounded more like a summer holiday than a school.
Yeah.
I loved the thought of it.
Yeah, but what happened was COVID was I think we were making great progress actually, by the way, and we were at top of the league tables in many areas of the curriculum, etc., and had wide praise as well from the Guardian to the Telegraph to the Times, whatever. I could literally do anything actually, but during the pandemic and school closures, this sort of woke ideology was ramped up massively, and I've not seen a return to where we were going since that time. So, for example, character education, which is where my expertise is. So this is the building of resilience and getting children to move beyond their comfort zones in order to get stronger and to find the inner resources they need in order to tackle any of life's challenges. There seems to have been this sort of, that's been set back massively from school closures, but then this sort of entrenching of woke ideology technology. So, I mean, a massive part of that, of course, is the lack of any sort of role models, which I think are inspiring, particularly to boys. So I draw on the mythological hero's quest. So, for example, Odysseus and any of those kind of great Greek myths, or some heroes from history or who are alive today, such as Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, or back in history to have like Dr. Martin Luther King, etc. Men who inspire empowerment. And I feel like what children and young people are being offered at the moment are not empowered, inspiring people. They are generally weak and confused, and the whole thing just creates more of the same. So confused and weak children. And what your guest earlier was talking about, the kind of back in the day sort of World War II sort of heroes. And I'm fortunate because my paternal father, so my dad's dad, fought in the Somme, the Battle of the Somme in World War I, with the Cameron Highlanders. So I grew up with stories of resilience and bravery and freedom fighting. My headmaster at school was a World War II veteran. He fought in North Africa in World War II. And, I had all of these wonderful, resilient men around me sharing stories which inspired the same thing in me, which is why I think I was the only head teacher or school principal out of 43,500 in the entire United Kingdom to publicly question the COVID vaccine rollout to children. And this isn't, I'm not going off topic here, but the fact that I know other head teachers, men, who shared my concerns but publicly didn't share them shows how far we've fallen as a society when men can't stand up for their communities, and that's what we need to get back to.
Hang on, Mike, I'm just going to involve Jasmine here in the studio. Jasmine, do you agree with that thesis? And furthermore, do you agree that boys, I think, in particular, seem to be being ill-served?
Yes, and it does seem to be deliberate. I mean, we're seeing a feminisation of society in a wrong way. I speak as a female. There's a weird sort of feminisation, the transgender element. We're telling boys that being masculine is toxic. Whatever you do, it's toxic. We're not, as you said, we're not giving them proper role models. This sense, these good qualities like bravery, standing for principle, morality. And yeah, if these other head teachers had those elements and were themselves trying to live them, loads of them would have spoken out and we would have had a very different situation.
It would have been so different if any one collective group, like, for example, the teachers, had all come forward and said, not in my school, then the narrative, the flow of that narrative could have changed considerably.
Yeah.
I'm up against a break, but Mike Fairclough's going to stay with us. We're going to pick this conversation up, develop it, but I have to go into a break. I'll also be joined by YouTuber and author Cameron McGregor. We'll be continuing the discussion. His channel, Finance, Freedom and Neomasculinity, is about embracing a changed world for the modern man. Don't go away.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
King Charles has launched his own aftershave, costing, wait for it, an eye-watering 135 quid for a 100 millilitre bottle, promising buyers that they can smell just like the gardens of his Highgrove country pile. Now, this is something that Meghan Markle would do, surely not the King. Is this a case of King Charles selling out, watering down the brand just like Meghan? Well, join me now to discuss this is the royal broadcaster, Helena Chard. Helena, welcome to the show.
Martin,
often on the show, we've had a pop at Meghan Markle, the Sussexers, for selling out, for flogging strawberry jam, and now the King is flogging Pong. Is this really the right royal thing to do?
Do you know what? So the joy of luxury Highgrove splash, at the end of the day, Highgrove is such a special place, and the Highgrove shop sells amazing things on there. And as we know, the profit actually goes towards charity. So it's the King's Foundation, which was formed in 1986. Profits go towards educational and training, and it's all to do with this sort of sustainable world. But not to forget as well the charitable aspect and the whole ethos of the King's Foundation, and that's so important. This is not just something that's going up on the website and just being sold purely to go into someone's pocket. So I think, all in all, I think everyone should have a look at the Highgrove website and see what's on for sale. I mean, there are lots of really lovely, I think pretty fairly priced products. And even more so, go and see the gardens. As we know, King Charles is a keen environmentalist and the gardens are fabulous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show, where we are continuing our discussion about men and the role of men in today's world. And I want to talk about the manosphere, described by my next guest as a revolt against a broken society. Cameron McGregor has a YouTube channel called Men and the City. It's a channel about finance, freedom and neo-masculinity. It's about embracing a changed world for modern men. And Cameron joins me now from Buenos Aires. Hello, Cameron. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Neil. Well, from one to another, thanks for hosting me on your program. I look forward to the conversation.
Oh, good. Now, I'll ask you right off the top. Buenos Aires, I have to say, is somewhere that I would associate with a more traditional kind of masculinity, perhaps, than we're used to in our own metropolitan areas. Is that the case, or is that just a myth?
Well, I would say yes and no. One of the things about Buenos Aires, where I am now, it's a very literate society. That's a very good thing. People are active readers. It tends to be more intellectual. The downside of that is the Marxist influence is also very strong. So feminism is actually stronger down here than you might think.
Okay. Now, I've been paying a lot of attention to what you've been saying online recently, and amongst other strands, I picked up on the idea that, with an optimistic point of view, really, you're seeing a resurgence of masculinity manifesting, let's say, in younger men, realising that the time has come for them to pick up their share of the responsibility and the burden for making society better and getting on with it. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think so. Well, we need to give a little bit of context for where we stand today. I'd say there's three main precursors that have brought men to the point of what I call neo-masculinity, which is really about three things. It's about revolt, it's about resurrection, as you put it, and it's about reform. And that is a Marxist turnover of institutions that really started in the 1960s. I know that's a subject you're well versed in. Singularly targeted Western civilization for destruction, and importantly, the standard bearers of Western civilization, whom they have identified as men and masculinity. The second precursor, I would say, or cause, is the deindustrialization and financialization of the economy that began largely in the 1970s when the US dollar decoupled from gold and systematically deindustrialized. When that happened, the socioeconomic power of men was sort of stripped bare because we were the human capital that powered that industrial capacity. And the third, and perhaps the most important cause, is mass immigration. It's the weaponization of immigration such that open borders and demographic replacement have reprioritized the interests of immigrants at the expense of local native-born populations. Men have borne the brunt of that social scarring, particularly young men, especially since the global financial crisis in 2008. And so young men who've been villainized by institutions have been forced out of mainstream society and into a kind of parallel community, the manosphere being sort of the umbrella term. And it is in the manosphere where men are reconciling the extent of damage that's been done to the West and coming to grips with the fact that we need fundamental reform and we need a more empowered masculinity to implement that reform.
And it's wonderful to hear that idea, because I hear implicit within it the idea that especially younger men, you know, the generations coming through, are looking on at what surrounds them and what has gone before them, and rather than, you know, surrendering to it and buckling under it, this sense that you've identified of them seeing, no, the time has come to put our shoulder to the wheel. If the politicians are useless, we should get into politics. If the bureaucracies and the entities of state are rotten at the core, we will put ourselves into that and make them better.
Yeah, that's precisely correct. And it goes beyond the manosphere. I would include the Bitcoin community as a part of this. There is a ferocious commitment to reform across the board. So in the Bitcoin community, there is a recognition that the financial system, root and branch, is broken and needs to be overhauled. In the manosphere, there's a recognition that the gender imbalance, the toxicity between the genders has gotten out of control, and we need reform. At a minimum, we know that divorce rates in the United States, for instance, are over 50%, but 80% of custody is rewarded to mothers rather than fathers. So there is an impetus for reform there. It's also evident in the alternative media complex, which is increasingly committed to free speech and uncovering the corruption and inefficiency that beleaguers a lot of Western governments. So the impetus for reform is strong, and it's getting stronger.
Bear with me, Cameron, while I talk to my guest in the studio, Jasmine Birtles. Now, you're a finance expert as well. It's a fascinating concept, no? A renaissance, an accepting of responsibility by especially young men that finance is broken, the economies are broken, politics is broken, and the time has come.
It's marvellous. It's really exciting to hear, because, you know, what we do need is, as you say, a resurgence of effort. We need genuine morality. And you know, I said this earlier, but what we as women are looking for is really men who will man up in terms of standing for principle, not, you know, going and fighting a bear. I mean, that's great if they can do that, but a braver thing to do is to stand for principle, to stand and say what is right when everybody else is shouting at you that you're wrong. And this is what we need. And if we have more of these, and we don't have to have millions, just you know, a good solid team of them doing this, then they can change things. They really genuinely can make a genuine difference to politics, to the world, and to us individually.
Cameron, I'm sure you were listening to what Jasmine had to say there. I'm also, my earlier guest, I don't know if you heard any of what Mike Fairclough had to say. He's a teacher, an educator, and he is, well, frankly, in despair, really, about the way in which the curriculum had evolved in this country. You know, he sees a sort of a deliberate demolition of society, and he's sensitive to what especially was happening to, you know, to men in this country, to poor working class white boys especially, being given a very negative message. Education, how does that face a resurrection in the manosphere?
Yeah, I mean, there is a recognition across the board, not just in the United States, I think across Western Europe as well, that educational institutions, some of the best institutions, especially the Ivy League schools, have been completely subverted and destroyed over the last several decades. And so they have invested, and you're starting to see figures like Jordan Peterson emerge, who has become the sort of intellectual vanguard of a counter-thrust in a new direction. And as I said, this is only going to get stronger. I would also add something else. What we're experiencing today is not simply the residue of some very bad ideas that have been institutionalized and weaponized against men. It's also a leadership vacuum. That's what you're seeing unfold in the United States. It's not clear who's running the White House. It's not clear who's directing our foreign policy. I think you're seeing a similar development in Germany and in France, where you have coalition governments that don't have a clear direction forward. There is a vacuum of power of sorts, and men, I think, are organizing to fill that vacuum.
Cameron, this is a conversation that we're going to keep going immediately following this. But I've got to just let my television audience know at the moment that that's the end of that TV hour. But stay tuned on GB News for the brilliant Free Speech Nation. We have more content online. Neil Oliver Show continues. We'll be discussing with Cameron McGregor and with Mike Fairclough. We'll be talking about the manosphere. We'll be talking about the resurgence of the male. We'll be talking...
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. It remains unsettled over the next 24 hours, particularly across western parts of Scotland. Drier further southeast and turning increasingly humid as well. A deep area of low pressure sits to the northwest of the UK. Outbreaks of rain pushing in from the Atlantic, but also drawing in some quite warm and humid air. Through the rest of Sunday into the early hours of Monday, rain across parts of Northern Ireland into Scotland, this turning increasingly heavy. Met Office warning in place across western parts of Scotland right through until the end of Monday. Temperatures overnight, despite clear spells even in the south, remaining in mid-teens for many, 14 to 16 Celsius. So a mild, muggy start to Monday. Best of the sunshine across southeastern areas, but heavy rain across western parts of Scotland. You can see the bright colours there. So some tricky travelling conditions first thing, with this slowly pushing northeastwards through the day. Northern Ireland as well, seeing outbreaks of rain push in now and then, and temperatures around 19 or 20 Celsius, so a muggy start to the day. Cloudy across Wales, the West Country, with some drizzle over the hills, but that sunshine from the word go across southeast England. As we go through the day, rain continues to push north and eastwards across Northern Ireland, affecting parts of Scotland. It'll be here where it'll be heavy at times. Western parts of northern England, Wales also seeing the risk of some rain, which will turn heavy later on in the day. Best of the dry and bright weather holding on further south and east, where it will be warm and humid. Temperatures reaching 25 to 27 Celsius, a little fresher across the far northwest, highs around 19 degrees here. For Tuesday, this weather front eventually starts pushing its way south and eastwards, clearing much of the UK through the morning. Showers, though, pushing in across Northern Ireland, western Scotland, some of these heavy at times, and generally a fresher feel for all. Further showery rain expected through the middle towards the end of the week as well. See you soon.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We could be calling you with the news that you've won our latest Great British giveaway, an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. David from Kent was our last big winner. Listen to what he had to say about getting that winning call.
Hi, I'm David from Kent and I won £15,000 and it couldn't have come at a better time. I was gobsmacked. What have you got to lose for what it costs? In fact, I've done it again this week, so I'd recommend it to anybody.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from